Good evening, everyone, and welcome to BabyChakra. It's really a pleasure to be here today and talk about fragile eggs. Um, I will tell you a little about myself first, a little about the condition, and then we will take questions and answers. I am Shalini, the chairperson of the Fragile Egg Society of India. We started this organization in 2003 basically to be a support system for families whose children are affected with the condition. Our role was more of receiving phone calls of parents who have just received a diagnosis for fragile eggs and them being, of course, they're very lost and they need support. They want someone to talk to them. We would connect them with other families from the same city. They would exchange resources and we would always tell them that we are there as a support whenever we are needed. And we have a 24-hour helpline that they can reach out to us at any time. Over the years, as we helped more and more families, we realized the dire need for awareness for Fragile X syndrome. And we expanded our role to start creating awareness for this condition. So we've all heard about intellectual disabilities, and I think the most common cause and the first leading cause of inherited intellectual disability is Down syndrome, which we've all heard about, and it's quite common. The doctors do the screening now, and now parents can make an informed decision. So, what is Fragile X syndrome? Fragile X syndrome is an inherited condition and it causes intellectual disability and autism. This condition is prevalent worldwide and the need for awareness is also worldwide. As we have 23 pairs of chromosomes and our last pair is the X and the Y chromosome. Our chromosomes carry our genes. On the X chromosome, there is a gene known as the FMR1 gene. This gene is broken and does not produce the protein needed for brain development. So the child who is having Fragile X syndrome does not have the FMR protein available in his brain to help him with his development. One in 4,000 boys and 1 in 6,000 girls are affected with this condition. The symptoms would vary from intellectual disability, learning disability, speech problems, sensory integration problems, behavior problems, to developmental milestones. Some children have delayed developmental milestones. They don't sit, stand, walk, talk on time. Some may have only a behavioral, displayed in their behavior. And the physical features include a long face, protruding ears, a large forehead, a prominent jaw, hyperflexible joints. Many children with Fragile X syndrome have recurrent ear infections. Some children can have a squint, and these are just a few of the symptoms we have shared as to what to look out for if you think someone has Fragile X syndrome. Why is it so important to create awareness on this condition? Fragile X syndrome can cause autism. There is a lot known about autism, and in fact, many a times, children with Fragile X syndrome are misdiagnosed with autism. Well, very often parents ask us, how would it make a difference whether the child has autism or Fragile X? They anyway will have to go for therapies and they are going to have an intellectual disability. There is a huge difference between autism and Fragile X. Autism is a behavioral condition. Fragile X is a genetically defined medical condition. Autism cannot be tested with a blood test. Fragile X can be tested with a blood test. Autism cannot be prenatally tested, and Fragile X can be prenatally tested. And the most important difference, for autism, there are no targeted treatments, but for Fragile X, there are a lot of targeted treatments. So basically, to sum it up till now, we are talking about a condition called Fragile X syndrome, which is an inherited condition. It gets inherited silently in most of the cases. When a child is affected and is a full mutation for the condition, the FMR protein is not being produced in the brain, and that hampers the child's development, whether it is gross motor and fine motor development or intellectual development. There is a lot that can be done for these children, and early diagnosis is, of course, the key. Early integration into therapy can actually change the prognosis of a child dramatically. These children may need support with their speech and language, occupational therapy, behavior therapy, special education, and they can come a long way. Sorry, just a minute. Yeah. In India, we have seen at least 1,000 families with Fragile X syndrome. And out of those 1,000 families, some families have more than one child affected. Like I said, it is an inherited condition. And if not diagnosed, the second or the third child can also have the same condition. So we are working very hard as an organization to spread awareness on Fragile X syndrome, because an early diagnosis can lead to the right treatment and a good prognosis. 1 minute, we have some questions coming in. We'll take the questions towards the end, because we'll finish talking first. So the gene responsible for Fragile X syndrome was only discovered in the year 1991, which is not even 30 years ago. And as the researchers studied the gene and studied the implication of the gene on the child, they discovered a lot about how it impacts the pre-mutation carriers also. So carriers who carry the gene are called pre-mutation carriers. We have come across women who are carriers of the Fragile X pre-mutation gene, and 20% of them have a low ovarian reserve and find it difficult to conceive. So that brings us to the importance of why we are again working so hard to create awareness for Fragile X amongst the IVF community. If a woman has a low ovarian reserve and a low AMH with a raised FSH, we highly recommend she test for Fragile X before starting any treatment for fertility. Being a carrier for Fragile X, her success for an IVF cycle is definitely lower than another woman. She has a risk of having a child with the condition, and these important facts need to be told to her before she makes such an important decision of her life. Children with Fragile X syndrome have a lot of strengths. They have a long-term memory. They are visual learners. They have very good imitation skills. They have a very good sense of responsibility. When streamlined in the right way, there are a lot of things they can learn to do. And so it's very important that I think the most important take home messages from our end would be, if you come across a child with an intellectual disability or autism, please read up about Fragile X to see if the child meets those parameters. If you get a diagnosis of Fragile X, it is going to change things dramatically. If there is a woman having problems with fertility, she definitely should test for Fragile X, because if she is a carrier for Fragile X syndrome, she would probably have to make different reproductive choices for herself and her family. And the reason I titled this talk Fragile or Broken, so it's actually quite interesting. Technically and scientifically, it's called Fragile X syndrome, but actually the gene is broken. And that is the reason I chose my topic as Fragile X syndrome. So I think we are ready for questions, if there are any. Yeah. So people want, one question is, tell us about the behavior of children with Fragile X syndrome. Well, children with Fragile X syndrome can have sensory processing issues. And if they have sensory processing issues, they will portray as behavior problems. So before deciding whether the child, what you're seeing is actually a behavior issue or a sensory processing issue, it's very important to visit an occupational therapist, and she will be able to assess it for you. The child might need a sensory diet into their daily routine, which would help them through the day, and you will see a lot of changes in the behavior of the child. Secondly, we always say that children with Fragile X syndrome are visual learners, and it's very important to support what you teach them visually. We encourage families to use visual schedules and visual timers at home. It's very important because a child knows, they can see visually what is expected out of them and what is coming next. So another important aspect of Fragile X syndrome is anxiety. Children with Fragile X syndrome have a very high level of anxiety, and that anxiety will very often manifest in the form of behavior, learning disability, disobedience. So the FMR protein is responsible for regulating anxiety and is missing in these children. Some children with Fragile X syndrome benefit with medications for anxiety, but a lot of children get help with visual schedules, and they just need to know what is happening next in their schedule, and that would really lower their anxiety and help them through the day. So that's an important way to manage their anxiety. The next question. We're talking about preventing Fragile X syndrome. That's an interesting question. So how does one prevent Fragile X syndrome? Like I said, Fragile X is an inherited condition, and very often it passes down silently through generations. But if the child is diagnosed with Fragile X syndrome, the family receives genetic counseling, and then they have an option for their next child. A woman who is a carrier for Fragile X syndrome has a 50-50% chance of passing it on to either of her children. So usually we recommend that the fetus be tested at 12 weeks, and that will give the family clarity on whether the next child is carrying the condition or not, and empowers them to take a decision about the condition. So that is the important way of, I can't say prevention, but an informed decision about Fragile X. That's how they can decide whether they want to go ahead. And again, when it comes to IVF, we have experienced around 5 to 6 families who've gone through 5 years and 7 years of IVF treatment and had a child with Fragile X syndrome. So that is why we are propagating that if a woman below 30 has a low ovarian reserve, a low AMH, and a high FSH, she should first test for Fragile X before going in for a fertility treatment, because she will have a better understanding of her reproductive options. So the next question is that the child is 10 years and is not yet speaking. Speech is an area of concern for children with Fragile X syndrome. However, it is very important to continue giving the speech and language therapy. Speech is not just about the physical ability to speak, but also language and comprehension. So, of course, I would encourage alternative remedies like board or those AAC apps. You have a lot of good apps on the iPad which help the child communicate. It's very important for us to understand that lack of speech does not mean lack of need of communication. The child still wants to communicate with you. So even if he's not being able to speak, on one hand, you try therapies and everything that will help the child speak, but you open other avenues for the child to be able to communicate with you, which can be done with those assisted apps. There are many apps. I think the first app that's coming to my mind is the Avaz app, which is an Indian app, and it's really good for communication. So for families to remember that even if the child is not speaking, he still may want to communicate. It's important to let them give them opportunities to communicate. The next question is, what are the chances of living a normal life in the future as they get older? I think normal or not normal is a perception we have. Whether if you're going to compare your child to another child of his age, he is probably not going to be like that. It's a very different life to be living with a child with Fragile X syndrome. But there are a lot of things these children can achieve. They can have a job, they can drive a car, they can get married, they can live a very close to normal life. But of course, they are not going to be able to live a life exactly like another person his age. What are the things to be kept in mind while growing up with a child with Fragile X syndrome? The first thing I say to all families is unconditional love and acceptance. Whether it is any condition of your child, whether he has special needs or not, whether he has dyslexia, whether he is slow in sports, for every parent, it is imperative to give the child unconditional love and acceptance. And that is the first step to see your child bloom. I give an example to most families who talk to me about special needs and acceptance. You imagine a child with special needs. Every time he walks out of the house, he gets into the elevator, he gets into the school bus, he goes to the school. He is swamped with looks that tell him, oh, you are different. Or maybe if you would do this better, we would accept you better. But at home, if the family accepts him for the way he is, working hard towards his betterment, this child is just going to bloom. So, the most important tip for a family is to give the child unconditional love and acceptance and keep working on his progress. Continue with the therapies, continue teaching him the way he will learn. It's very, very essential to incorporate things like visual schedules, visual timers, things that will keep his anxiety low into your day to day living. Whether your child is 2 years old or 15 years old, that is going to empower the child to live a more near normal, if you would like to say, or I would say a more fulfilling life. Because it's very difficult for a child to be competing against another child with his limited abilities. The next question is if there is a cure for Fragile X syndrome. So there is a lot of research that is taking place for Fragile X syndrome, but sadly, there is no cure for Fragile X syndrome. As I explained earlier, Fragile X takes place when the FMR1 gene is broken. A cure would mean we're able to fix the gene or replace the gene or replace the protein that the gene was supposed to produce in the brain, and that is not yet possible. So there is no cure for Fragile X syndrome, but the treatments are many. I think the most important is anti-anxiety, because anxiety is one area, and of course a lot of therapies. And the biggest mantra I tell every parent is unconditional love and acceptance. I'm just waiting if there are any more questions. Sorry. And it's very important for me to tell you that our organization is based in Mumbai. We have a networking all over India. We're available on Instagram. We have our website. We have a list of centers on our website which you can contact to go for testing. Of course, you can contact us directly also. Very often, a few of the queries we receive is that, okay, my child is 3 years old and he's been diagnosed with autism, and I've never heard the words Fragile X before. So what should we do? And we will have our first consult with them and go over all the questions they have and all the symptoms they have, and then recommend the test. It is a DNA test done via a blood sample, and it is available at quite a few places in India, which are listed on our website. And if anyone has questions, of course, they can contact us, and we are very happy to help them out. I'm just waiting to see if there are any questions. So let me also tell you, there are 30 organizations all over the world who are working towards awareness and support for Fragile X syndrome. Ours is the only organization in India, and we're also like we're constantly looking at ways to educate people on the condition. We have, in fact, last year, the Indian Academy of Pediatrics launched the guidelines for Fragile X for the first time in India. And that was a huge step forward because it gives the doctors a handbook of what all is needed, what are the medications, the genetic counseling, the next step, etc. So the next question is about medical requirements. Um, yeah, as the child grows, initially for smaller children, we wouldn't want to medicate them. We would try more therapeutic ways of handling the child. Some children, if their ADHD is very severe, they might need medication for ADHD. A lot of children are on anti-anxiety medications, which makes a huge difference. There has been a lot of research about metformin being a very good drug for children with Fragile X syndrome. It increases their cognitive ability. There are many children in India taking the drug, and it has shown remarkable results. So, yeah. Also, another important thing is that around 48% of the boys who have Fragile X syndrome might have epilepsy. So they need to go for anti-epileptic drugs and treatment um, if they have epilepsy. So it's very important to keep that in mind. And about the inheritance pattern, men and women both can be carriers for Fragile X syndrome. Usually, women are carriers more in number, and there are lesser men who are carriers. Um, so if we come across a woman who is a carrier for Fragile X, we would usually need to get her siblings also tested to see if they carry the gene and what are the chances of passing it on to the next generation. That is again another way to have reproductive choices for Fragile X. I think there's a question again about autism and Fragile X. Though we've spoken before, I'll cover it again. Um, Around 4 to 6% of children who have autism because of Fragile X. And that is why it's very important that children who have autism should be tested for Fragile X. It would make a difference not only to the child who will receive targeted treatments, but also to the extended family because it is an inherited condition. And if the child has autism because of Fragile X, they can take the necessary precautions for the next child. I'm just waiting if there are any questions, and I believe this video will be up on BabyChakra. It's an amazing platform. I have recently got introduced to it, and it's a very empowering platform. When as I browse through the different topics and the different speakers they bring in, I think it's truly an important tool for all parents to have. So this conversation is going to be there. If you all have questions later, we're happy to answer them for you. And yeah, I don't think there are any more questions. So I think that's it. I would really like to thank everyone who is here today and have joined us at BabyChakra. Thank you, BabyChakra, for this lovely opportunity to talk about Fragile X syndrome and help us create awareness. I am sure many and thousands of people will be watching this video later at their comfort. And if there are any questions, please feel free to get back to us. Thank you so much.